There's a phenomenon going on right now. See all these kids? It doesn't matter how many adults are sitting here, there's still an overrun of children up there. I just want you to know, Erica, you're doing a great job. They did great. They did great. That's a phenomenon. It doesn't matter how many are in worship, there's the same number of children. Someday, you know what's going to happen? We're all going to show up all at the same time, and the kids will just take us over like termites in the house. I'll welcome that day. Part of our horizon statement, this isn't part of the message this morning, part of our horizon statement is that we fill the halls with laughing children and families and individuals, and that's a part that we're seeing come to pass. I asked the literary experts in my home if they knew who Don Quixote was. I got some blank stares. And it made me question whether I was going to use this as my opener today. But I'm going to plow on because I didn't want to rewrite. Don Quixote is an old story. It's about a man who seeks to be brave and noble, to defend against injustice. He's willing to sacrifice. He wants to be a knight, and he wants to be a hero. And yet, in his day, he can find nobody to fight. There's no call for him to take up arms and be the noble man that he expects himself to be. And so over time, he really begins to hallucinate. And in one of the famous, what's called quixotic visions that he has, he looks out over the field and thinks what he sees are giants to be slayed. And so he takes up sword and he mounts his horse and he armors up and he goes to fight the giants, and they immediately whip him because they're not giants, they're actually windmills, and windmills don't respond to sword strikes. In thinking he's fighting a mighty battle, he's just being insane. And I'm afraid for some of us, we walk into our spiritual life, we look about us, we watch the news, and we see in our face the social, the political, the financial giants that are around us. And we tend to take up the scripture as an agent, as a sword to fight the social, the political, and the financial giants around us. And there are some popular theological movements. They're mostly just pagan movements, but they use Bible verses in order to fight these enemies. And what happens is we end up like Don Quixote. We desire to do good things, but we can't really identify who our actual enemy is. And so we end up fighting against and acting like fools, fighting false enemies instead of the real enemy. I want you to know something is very true this morning. You have a real spiritual enemy. I'm not dismissing the agency of all the things that you see, but I'm saying the things that you see are not the power within. They're not the power that drives. And so you can take up your faith in order to fight your political enemies, but I want you to know you're just being Don Quixote. You have to see rightly in order to fight rightly. And we're going to talk about that today. We have been talking through what it means to be an ambassador. We just introduced this, and we laid out the distinctives in three main categories. Number one, we're new creatures. Ambassadors are new creatures. Number two, ambassadors are unique in the world. They are seen uniquely in the world, meaning if the world looks at you and you're like everybody else, you're getting the ambassador part wrong. You're getting the service of Christ wrong. And number three, ambassadors are entrusted with this holy mission, an active work, not just a passive state of being. You aren't just labeled that to sit in your embassy, at home, or attend church, but you're actually supposed to advance the boundaries of God's work, the spiritual boundaries of God's work throughout the whole world. And Jesus laid out this global mission for us. And so as a congregation, we try to put our money where our mouth is and our time where our intentions are, and we try to go and we try to give around the world. That's why we do those things. Figuring that you'll handle your neighbors. Figuring that you'll handle your neighbors, because none of us would want to be found by the Lord to be disobedient as ambassadors, given a calling in the faith, but faithless to do it. None of us would want to be found that way any more than we want our boss to find us texting when we should be working. So today, we're going to learn how to fight the right fight, how to push back darkness. We're going to learn how to fight the right fight. I want you to take your Bibles. We're going to anchor today in Ephesians chapter 6, picking up in verse 10. And we're going to carry through to verse 13. I'm going to deprive you of something that has a whole lot of appeal. I'm not going to get into the armor of God. Some of you will be familiar with Ephesians 6, 10 through the rest of verse 20. We are not getting into the armor of God. Even though in verse 20, Paul, the apostle, calls himself an ambassador in chains. He uses that key word. But I want to focus today really on how to fight the right fight, because I think most of our issue is just clarity of thought. We need to see what we're up against so that we know what we're fighting against. And we get wrapped up in political opinion, and we get wrapped up in social situations, and we get wrapped up in our financial world, and we tend to get drawn off into false battles. We start feeling like the other political side is our enemy. And we begin to think that those people are sub-worthy of the gospel. We begin to label them as a lot of different pejoratives rather than loving them like Christ loved all people. So instead of them becoming part of our mission, they become part of our vengeance. They become enemies. Yes, those who don't believe in Christ, no matter how friendly they are enemies in the Lord. But I want you to know Jesus died to save enemies. You and I are chief among them. He saved us while we hated him. So we're going to try to focus and learn how to fight the right fight. So let's read our passage today. Again, I want to remind you, this isn't a strictly exegetical sermon. We would have covered the rest of Ephesians and then got here. This is a little bit topical, so you just need to understand that when we preach through books, which is our normal thing, we would have covered all of the social passage before about the construction of the home and all those matters, and it would have rolled us in then to this first word in verse 10 of chapter 6 in Ephesians, finally. You see that? So he's concluding everything that he said, and it's almost as if to say, and if there's anything else that you're challenged about, let me boil it down for you. There's a lot of issues following Jesus. And he's just talked about how following Jesus changes your home life. So then in verse 10, he almost seems to say, and there's probably other things we could give you instructions about, but here's how I want you to see your existence in the earth. All right, so it's fitting then for our theme of learning to fight the right fight, because yes, he gave us specific instructions for how our husbands love their wives and children obey their parents, and enslaved peoples obey their masters, and masters treat their slaves in the household. Okay, all of that is a social context, right? And in verse 10, he says there's probably other things. All right, so here's how this passage goes. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Very next word in verse 14, stand, therefore. You catch all of the theme here? Stand, stand, stand. He's telling us how to exist as ambassadors in a world that is fighting against us, that has actively targeted us, that is pushing back against the message of transformation and the authority of God Himself. And He says to us, first, that ambassadors are in this fight. You are in the fight. So it's interesting. You watch the history of warfare. You read about it. We hear all kinds of stories. And one of the things that the Allied powers, it's hotly contested this day, whether it was an ethical action or not. And it was even considered during World War II whether it was a moral thing to do in the fighting of the Japanese. Knowing that most Japanese houses were made of wood and were tightly compacted, there was an orchestrated effort to firebomb Tokyo. Long before the dropping of the A-bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were firebombing Tokyo. And here's the justification. The justification was all of these houses and all the people in them are complicit in the war effort. And you know why they thought they were complicit in the war effort? Because unlike American factories where all the machinery would typically be in the shop or in the warehouse, most of the machinery for ammunition making was outsourced to individual homes. And so all these homes clustered around the main manufacturing of the heavy materials involved. So you would take a bullet loading device home with you. It's checked out to you by the Japanese government, and you're making bullets. And so the justification went this way, that if we just bomb the factory, we don't actually stop the production of bullets. So we have to bomb the houses. There's a problem with that, right? Because children live there. And even if moms and dads get to choose what they're doing, children are also there. And so the justification went that way. Here's what I want you to know. When Satan looks out there, he sees you as complicit in the work. Just the fact that you have believed in Jesus makes you a potential enemy, even if you're lazy about it. You don't have to be a good war fighter to be in this fight. I think part of the issue we run into as churches is we're not real clear in what we're inviting people to believe in. We're saying, listen, you become a part of not just Christ for salvation in eternity, but also for Christ in His work among others. Now, the beautiful thing is this, you're bringing life to people. But I want you to know, not everybody wants your kind of life. Not everybody wants God's kind of life. Some people, most people, okay, all people, just ask a 2-year-old, know what's best for them and want to do that thing that they believe is best for them. I mean, would any of us not eat honey Cheerios instead of regular Cheerios if we got the choice? Honey Cheerios are way better than regular Cheerios. And if Mom let me, I would have always eaten those. But she wouldn't always let me. She told me something about diet and diabetes if I indulge and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a whole lot of hogwash that she told me about honey Cheerios. But turns out she was right. Most of us, all of us, would completely screw up our lives if left to ourselves. You look around the world and you look at your neighbors around you and you look at your city around you. I want to tell you something. One, the U.S. is pretty well organized. We have stripes on most of our roads. That's a big deal. No, you're like, well, it doesn't seem to be a big deal to all the people around me. If you've ever driven in India, I want you to know something. It's a big deal to have stripes on the road, and most people believe that you should stay within them. And now your car believes it should stay within them on its own. It's even more babysitting that you get into. The reality is we're in this fight. And he commands us, here's his command, he says, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. The idea in this passage, in verse 10, is that you are to bolster yourself in the empowerment that you have been given. In other words, you decide repeatedly to be strong in the Lord. That's the idea behind being strong in the Lord is a repetitious thing. But the second half of it has more to do with the standard of strength you've been given. So you repeatedly have to decide, I'm going to be strong in the Lord. And what that means is, I'm going to repeatedly decide to be empowered by his presence in my life. You can't just sometime in the past decide, I'm going to walk with Jesus. You do need to do that. Maybe today you need to do that. But I want you to know something. If you ever let up in your decision to be empowered by God, to live in that empowerment, then you will be sniped. If you lose your focus on the battlefield, you die. Folks, I want you to know the similar thing is true here. If you lose your focus, if you forget you're in the fight, like one of the biggest problems for our soldiers on the ground with these asymmetric battles is that it's easy after day of walking the same tracks and doing the same patrols to lose focus on just how enemy your territory is. And so one day you get IED'd. It's a tough thing, right? Tough thing for our physical soldiers. And it's a tough thing in our spiritual life. If every day you don't decide to be strong in the Lord's empowerment, then you become out of focus and you lose attention. Notice he assumes the battle. He says, verse 11, to put on the whole armor of God because of the schemes of the devil. And I take this to mean the way the world is. There are a zillion things you run into every day that are ready to trip you up. If you lower your guard, pornography will take over. If you lower your guard, alcohol will take over. If you lower your guard, money will take over. If you lower your guard, you'll lose your family. You'll lose your kids. You'll lose your spouse, right? If you lower your guard, these are active dangers to us in our life and what God expects. And he tells us, he's just saying, listen, you have to assume the battle is around you. You wrestle with spiritual things. Notice that he lays these out. Now, some have done a lot of work on this topic about what rulers are, what authorities are in verse 12, what cosmic powers and the present darkness and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. All kinds of explanations of what these are. But in my research, I was able to conclude just one basic thing. That you have the expression of authority, rulers and authorities, all right? That's people like our elected officials, that's our governmental systems, that's our situation, the subtle authorities around us. And then you have the actual power behind those. And he lays it out. So we have common things, common nature of laws and legal systems and all that kind of stuff, the rulers, the authorities. But then you have what drives those. Now, am I saying that every elected official, that every law, that any government, all that are just innately evil? No, I'm not saying that. You ought to obey traffic laws. Those aren't from the devil. We can have saved, and I hope to have more saved, regenerate political leaders, right? That'd be good. But what he does lay out is the whole system of the world is not on Christ's side, but in fact is driven along by cosmic powers over the present, as he lays it out, over the present darkness and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And I want to tell you something. You could fight rulers and authorities, but you don't have guns for demons. And he tells us, here's your situation that you're in. The battle will seem physical, but it is actually driven along by spiritual aspects. So our leaders and those thought leaders, and there are many of them, those influencers on your favorite social sites, listen, the question is not so much what they're saying. The question is what drives what they're saying. It's possible to be a moral person but be completely godless. It's possible to build a standard of living that's pretty productive, that earns a lot of money, and that helps a lot of people. A lot of philanthropy has nothing to do with faith. And you got to ask yourself the question of why are they willing to do Feed the Hungry campaigns if they don't believe in Jesus? Look, it's not about outcomes. It's about what is underneath and what drives. And what you usually find in most philanthropic and secular efforts, what you usually find is some culture of death. So yes, it might be, feed the children, but also an abortion push. They almost always go together somehow. Where there's a thesis about reducing population in order to reduce future poverty. I mean, it's true. If there's no humans, there's not any poverty. That's true. It's also brutally evil. There are those who push a welfare system in our government. Now, I want you to know something. We lived in occasions where we saw the slavery, the enslavement of welfare systems. They seem to help. They offer some handouts. But if you let those things take over your life, they also enslave people to stay there, to never improve, never grow, never learn, never develop. The systems then behind that, you have to ask that question. You have to say, what are the dark forces involved here? Not everything that's out there is evil. I'm not saying find a demon everywhere. I'm just saying you got to know you're in the fight. And ambassadors then are able to identify spiritual opponents. I want to lay this out for you. Notice what he says. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. You catch that, verse 12? We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Okay, so let me say something that may be a little controversial for us. It's not the gays, it's not the trans, it's not the liberals, it's not the globalists, it's not the MAGA, the nationalists, the big pharma, the big food, the big ag. It's not the colored people, it's not the fascists, it's not the whites, it's not the commies, it's not the capitalists, it's not the Jews or the Zionists or the Muslims or the Mormons that are, quote, our enemies. It's the spiritual forces that cause those labels to dehumanize individuals who are made in the image of God and whom Jesus died to save. The moment we lose focus on who our enemy is, we reattach that enemy label to people whom we disagree with. So if you find yourself in a political camp, I want to tell you something. You better be an adherent to the principles of truth involved within that platform, not a diehard. Cultures have been enslaved to wickedness because of good-seeming politics. I don't have to mention the Nazis, do I? I don't have to mention the communists. We can all eat. We can all be the same as. Guys, I'm just telling you, if you get wrapped up in what seems good politically, if you get wrapped up on what feels right in the food world and in the pharmacy world, if you're watching all of the conspiracy theories out there, I want you to know you are in danger of mind enslavement, of misrepresenting who the actual opponent is. All people, all strangers, of whatever color or whatever background or whatever, those are the people that Christ died for, and therefore they are the targets of our message. We are ministers of reconciliation between every person who doesn't know Jesus and God himself. That's our job. So we can't afford to choose our enemies as long as those enemies are people. Now, should you be a communist? No, you should not be. You know why? Because part of communism is built on secularism, atheism. You have to reject God in order to be a communist. There are political positions that you can't hold, but it's not because of the position. It's because of the truths that undergird, rather the lies that undergird those things. So these are spiritual enemies, the rulers, the authorities, the cosmic powers, the spiritual forces, and they're defined from the mundane to the powerful. Look, when we go out, you don't need to fight the defeated and the deceived. You need to fight the spiritual forces that are defeating and deceiving people. You don't have enemies in people. You say, well, Kevin, actually that's not true. Physically, they might attack us. Paul is writing from prison. He knows the argument. He knows the physicality that's possible. He was beaten by these people that he preached to. He's not being naive. We're not being naive about the potential for violence and harm. He's just simply saying, look, don't fight the defeated and deceived. Fight for those who are defeated and deceived. You fight for them by bringing the truth, both in the way you live and in the things that you say. And listen, it's never been easier to express foolishness than it is today. Right now, before we get out of this room, you could check your social media and you could say something stupid and really mission hindering right now. Like you could just get on there and some of you are thinking, I bet I could say something stupid. I got something stupid to say. You could do it right now. Used to, you had to think and strategize about where you got to say something stupid. You had to wait for Monday when school was back in session, or when you're back with your friend who's politically opposed to you. Like you had to wait. But right now, you could do it. And a lot of us allow ourselves to be politicos rather than ambassadors. Here's our spiritual environment. Verse 13, he lays it out. And he says, you need to take up the whole armor of God. He defines it in verse 14 and following. He says, you need to take up the whole armor of God so that you can stand in the evil day. That's an interesting frame. He's told us that we are part of the present darkness. You notice that in verse 12. The cosmic powers over the present darkness. He says these forces exist in the heavenly places and they transmit down into their agents on earth, driven by humans that are deceived. And so here we are in this evil day. You're in the evil day. And so you have to take up the armor to deal with the evil day. His framing here as evil days is kind of interesting. It's not as clear as it seems. It could mean everything. It could describe a day that's just kind of a bad day. You had a bad day? Okay, I had a bad day. It was a mediocre day. This term that he uses could define like just casually mediocre day. It could also define like a hellfire day. It could define that day. So what day is he talking about? Just the ones that are really bad? No, he's talking about every day in which we exist. We are to take up the whole armor of God repeatedly and actively to get into your present day, the rest of your Sunday. In fact, you know, church people can say dumb things to you too. You might even get something dumb done or said before you get out of this house. I might say something dumb. I probably did say something dumb a moment ago. But it's our spiritual environment. We are impacted by that spiritual environment. It's our spiritual enemies, those spiritual forces that work on our heart and that chip away what otherwise we understand about the Lord. And so I need you to think about something for a moment. When you think about the arguments that you're in right now with your mom, with your parents, with your kids, with your whoever they are, with the people in your study group, in your Bible study, wherever you're at, and here you ask this question, am I fighting for flesh and blood, Or am I fighting darkness, actual darkness? If you say actual darkness, you need to have in mind spiritual truths that are deceptive in people's lives. Spiritual realities, I should say, that are deceptive in people's lives. If you're fighting those things, then that's great. Look, guys, we don't have social enemies. We always, as a congregation, have to have place for strangers, meaning strangers that come in with all kinds of backstory situations in their life. And we also have to have a way to say, hey, you're starting here. I may have no understanding of where you're starting, but I know where you need to go, and I'm walking the same way. If we lose that, if we become comfortable with being, quote, a family. I want you to know something about families. Close-knit, loving families are great. But close-knit, loving families are tough to marry into. Close-knit, loving families are not always open to strangers really penetrating within the family unit. And yet, ambassadors of Christ are helping people to walk out of the darkness of all the influences that are out there to hear the one source of truth from God. So, ambassadors push back darkness. Here's how we fight the right fight. So we fight the right fight. Number one, you've got to identify the battle around you. You have to identify the battle around you. And here's where you start. What godless matter is winning in your heart and mind? You have to identify first. Now, maybe we would say, well, pornography has a hold on me. But pornography itself is not the issue. It's its own issue. It's the use of pornography. So the problem is not that pornography exists. The problem is that you access pornography. It's the flesh appetite that's the problem. You catch the difference? When we're out here fighting a fight, it's not about killing off the pornography industry and then saying, curses on them, they're causing sinners. Sinners are the reason that pornography exists. All right, so it's actually flipped over. We're dealing with our own heart condition, and that's what feeds all of these opportunities for sin. And so when you look at the battle around you, you're asking this question, what godless matter is winning in my heart and in my mind? So this goes to all the people who you think are rage baiting you and triggering you. It's the problem in the social world, in the psychological world with triggers. Are there triggers? Are there things that generate anxiety? Absolutely. But the solution still come down to our heart situation. I can't always easily defeat those matters, and sometimes I have to hijack the system in order to win those battles. But in order to identify the battle, I have to look at my own heart, where my flesh has an appetite, where my actions are wrong against God, where the deepest parts of my soul crave these things. Number two, in order to fight the right fight, I have to know what victory actually is. Is victory in your financial situation to be rich? Like, would more money solve the financial situation? I mean, in some cases, the answer is yes. More money would solve the financial situation. But in most situations, better discipline is the answer. Most of us, our weight problems are not the fact that there's ultra-processed food. The problem is that we eat too much. You may not be able to control that there's ultra-processed food, but you can control what you eat. Right? Uh-oh. It's me, not them. Is that what we're saying? Listen, them exists as tempters, but it is me that does the sinning. So know what victory is. To be rich or to be money-wise. I tell you, if God gives you a lot of money, you'll want to be money-wise, because otherwise it'll destroy you. The money itself will destroy you. Number three, how you fight the right fight. You have to target actively rather than playing defensively. There's another passage here, part of this letter. He says in verse 13, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand. The word withstand, the Greek word is something more like oppose. That you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand firm. You catch that? And a lot of the scholarship on this has suggested that he's meaning we take a defensive posture toward the evil that's out there. We insulate ourselves, or we defend ourselves. Most of the reason for that posture is because it is also unwise and also unbiblical to go out looking for demons to cast out. All right, here's what we're not saying. I'm not saying you go look for a spiritual fight to have. You realize you lose that fight, right? If the Lord has not sent you in there, there are a few stories in the Scripture where, though bold, they were presumptuous in their fight against demons, and they ended up stripped and beaten. Okay, so we're not saying you go look for spiritual demons everywhere and everything gets named a Jezebel spirit or some other thing like that. I'm not talking about that at all. But what I am saying is that the passage does not support, or the language does not support, a strictly defensive stance toward the evil that's in our life, and that's in this present day. That word withstand is to oppose, so that you may be able to oppose on the evil day these works of darkness. The idea is that you're supposed to take up your full combat load to do active battle. Not to simply, to oppose means so that you have the capability to do battle. Not to withstand, meaning to not give ground. You catch the difference? You're not building fortresses, which is what most of our churches become. They become fortresses in which the outside world cannot penetrate. Except we come in. We're not insular from the world around us. We bring our sin. We're open about that. We should be open about that. We bring sin in. What's the problem with the world? Sinners. What's the problem with churches? Sinners. So if you don't actively decide to purge the evil from yourself and then to fight back against those who are deceived and being defeated, if you don't decide that and you don't load up with that full combat load to do that battle, then you will be taken over. Defensive is never enough in a spiritual battle. It also has to be active. Here's what I mean. There's got to be people in your life who need Jesus. I had this moment over the weekend, over the latter part of the week, and I had to get a tooth filling. You ever had that done? That's a fun experience. I got it twice in the same day. The morning I showed up for my appointment that I was late to, which is always frustrating. I was late the rest of my day. I know how Tracy feels now. Anyway, I showed up late to my appointment, and they did the work, and they had to do the mouth shots. You ever had a mouth shot? Yeah. Like, we're going to numb this up. It's only going to pinch a little bit. Dude, that hurt a lot. I don't know what it would have felt like if they hadn't numbed me up before they did all that. Anyway, okay, so I get all that done. They do the filling. I go to lunch, and the filling comes out. And it comes out at about the time when, you know how you're like most of your face is numb? Well, at about the time most of my face was not numb anymore, then I feel, because my tongue can now feel again, I feel that there's that gap in my tooth. I was like, oh man, I got to go back. So I go back after lunch. I spent the whole day in the dentist's office. Go back after lunch, and they have to do the mouth shots again. All right, so here we are, right, just getting this whole thing done. Terrible, awful, hate dental work, but I had this opportunity, and it made sense of it. One of my doctors is there. I have 2 mouth doctors now. It's the mark of age right there. When you have multiple doctors and you're like, which doctor is that? this week. Then you know you're getting a little older. Some of you older folks know exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, that's most of the people in your contact list is doctors' offices. Anyway, so my other doctor just comes in the office while we're kind of waiting, and he just starts talking to me. Like he's no agenda. And he tells me he's going to his home. It's a foreign place. He's going to his home for a little bit. And guys, I want to tell you something. I've been actively praying for opportunity to connect with this guy for like 2 years now, the whole time. And I finally got the opportunity over that little bit of a discussion. Like if you don't say, there are people in my life, they believe differently than me, they're from a different side of the proverbial tracks than I am, and have those as strangers in your life who need Jesus, listen, then you're playing defensively. And you have to have an active aspect, because that active aspect actually sharpens your spiritual focus. It helps you to think better about what you need to be doing and who Christ is to you when you have people out there who need your investment. And you know what it also does? Listen, the best way to deal with racist feelings is to have interracial friendships, personal connections. You know what happens? You get over it. If you were feeling that way, you get over it because you know people. Listen, so you have to target actively rather than playing defensively. Number 4, engage for the sake of victory. Engage for victory. The route, in military terms, the route, meaning when all command control breaks and the war fighters flee the scene, that's when most deaths occur on the battlefield. Not in active conflict, but in the rout. Here's what happens. When there's a perception among soldiers that command has collapsed, that command collapse will lead to people believing that they are alone. All right? And when they feel alone, then they begin to believe that their prospect for victory has collapsed. So what are they sacrificing for? If we're all going to lose anyway, we might as well get out of here. That's the psychology of the rout. None of those things have to be true. They have to be believed, and then the rout will occur. The fight or flight response will kick into flight. And so this is why our military does a ton of training to make sure that there are layers of leadership so command never seems to collapse. So that our dudes out there fighting this battle never feel alone and they don't have a sense that they're going to lose. And folks, I think some of us believe we're losing in the spiritual world. You look at the news and you're like, there's nobody that believes anymore. You realize that is the framework for the rout already taking place. Command has not collapsed. The Lord remains in charge. And that's why here in Ephesians, the apostle who is in prison says, the Lord is still causing you to stand. You see your leaders fall. Listen, there are evidences of this spiritual rout that take place when the emphasis is on the religious leader rather than the Lord himself. So when the religious leader falls, people fall away from the faith. What has happened? It's the psychology of the rout. If you attach yourself to Jesus, you know that command is still present and relevant and clear-headed, that Jesus hasn't missed it or doesn't know about the conditions of the world that you're in. You don't feel alone because you know that even if it seems lonely, that's a feeling rather than a reality. And your perspective is that even if I die in this, I'm not defeated. Resurrection is ultimate victory, so what's the worst? I've said before, I'll say it again, I'm a little bit afraid of dying, but not at all afraid of being dead. I don't know how it's all going to go down. I'm a little nervous about that part, but not nervous about the after. Number 5, assess your results. Assess your results. When you look out there and you feel like you've won spiritually, you need to assess what has actually happened. And here's what should happen. You individually should have grown and developed and matured. If living daily doesn't lead to spiritual development on your part, then you're not fighting spiritual battles. You need to look at your world and pursue spiritual causes rather than human frailties. Listen, it's not just about escaping bad things that you do. It's also about having the right perspective on what God is doing. Number 6, improve your outcomes. Listen, here's what he lays out. Notice he's talked about standing firm, standing in the evil day. After you've done everything to stand firm. And then verse 14, to stand, right? What's the emphasis? You have to make your fallback position standing, endurance. So even if you don't think you can win right now against the spiritual enemies that are in your life or the brokenness that's there, even if you don't think you can change your behaviors, your attitudes, your appetites, even if those things are kicking your tail, you have to decide that at the end of the day, I'm with Jesus. Your fallback position is endurance. Paul mentions this kind of fallback position. In 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10, he says, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. You catch what he says? We wanted to die. We thought we were goners. And then he goes on to say, but the Lord who delivered us out of every tribulation delivered us then too, that we might be able to continue. So you have to decide. My fallback position is not understanding, not making sense of, not fixing the problem, not any of that. My fallback position is endurance in the Lord. Even if I don't get it, and even if I feel totally whipped, I am still with the Lord, meaning I never break to the route. There's always a last stand. And you will overcome. And that's what he points out. Notice, his emphasis is not on the power of your opponents, but on your response to it. He says, stand, meaning you could choose not to, I assume, but you always can endure. You catch that? That's a super truth right there. You can endure. You don't have to break and run. Finally, in order to fight the right fight, to push back the darkness, you have to own the initiative for you and the people near to you. I think many of us are waiting. We're waiting for invitation to engage the spiritual. We're waiting for a church to set up an initiative so we can join the initiative and do the spiritual things that the church is doing. Our spiritual life doesn't exist at that level. It exists at the level of you waking up and you deciding that you're going to be with the Lord today. That's the initiative that you have to have. It's not a platform-based initiative where we launch you from church and you go and you win on Monday through Saturday and then you come back and you get recharged. It's an individual-based, a networked connection. You need brothers and sisters you can reach out to, an intelligent network of Christ followers who you can say, I'm having a hard time today. I need help enduring today. I need victory today. Will you help me? So you have to own this initiative. You can't wait for us to figure out what's going on with you so we can fix it. You have to decide that the solution is within your grasp and you can at least endure. You can do that. And so that's why he doesn't write this, that the second person plural is used. He says, all of you, this is how you're to think. Not church leaders, here's how you think, so that you can stabilize your people. He says, all of you individually, this is how you think, so you can be stable, so you can do this battle, you can fight the right fight. So let's wrap it up. Are you losing today? Anybody need a win? You see, that's the question. If you're losing today and if you need a win, then that victory is close at hand. You have to decide that you don't have to retreat anymore. That the lies that you know are there, the lies that the enemy tells you that you don't matter, that you're not important to God, that you're not valuable, that you know those are lies. And on a healthy day, you know they're lies. And I want you to know, because theologically, they're lies. Not because you feel them or don't feel them, but because theologically the Lord has said, you matter to the Lord. He loves you, He cares about you, and for those who have believed on Christ, He's made you pure and clean before Him, even if today you came in feeling dirty and broken. The spiritual truth is bigger than the physical feeling. So if you're losing today, if you need a win, then you have to own the initiative. You have to say, today I'm going to be in this fight. And you know what? Here's the other thing. Somebody else needs you to own the initiative for them. Dads, your kids need you to own the spiritual initiative in your home. Students, your classmates need you to own the spiritual initiative in your class. All of us, wherever we're at in life, there are people around us, if we would rally, they would have a better chance of rallying. Listen, people are out there looking for solutions and understanding to this world. And Jesus has provided that to us through faith in Him. Most of us, we don't have and we don't understand because we haven't tried and we haven't looked. You're not even asking the Lord for the right answers. You're just saying prayers like, Lord, get me out of my financial bind. And the prayer probably should be, Lord, teach me to be a better steward. Help me to grow up about the way I spend. You see, some of us, we just need to do a little time thinking about how we are pushing off our responsibility. We need to own that responsibility so we can grow in the Lord. And standing would mean owning the initiative. And somebody else needs you to own that initiative for them.